So to find the context of the text involves research around the time period when the text was composed, and of course you would compare that to now. So if you understand the culture of the period, it is easy to critique and analyse the work relative to the period of time when it was written. So, looking at the pictures to my right here, you might notice that yes, both of these are cars. But of course they are cars from their respective time periods. So if people in the late 1800s were thinking of a car, they were thinking about the image to the top there, which was a poorly working, barely feasible sort of object that didn't really go very far and broke down a lot. Now, when we think of a car now, we think of something a little bit different. Now, we may not necessarily be thinking of a big, loud sports car, but we think of a car a lot differently now. We think of it as convenience, we think of it as luxury, we think of it as almost an icon. And so our meaning of those particular references in the two texts are different. So while a text from perhaps somewhere in the 1800s might think of cars as being trouble ahead, now we think of cars as a luxury and as something that a society, basically, that we become almost over-dependent on. So the way that we look at cars now are very different from how they would have been looked at before. And this is one example of how the meaning of text changes throughout time periods, and particularly the ethics and particularly the sort of moral judgment of characters might be different depending on the societies that are judging them. So each work is basically relative to its time period. Now, of course, when you interpret it, you'll be interpreting it from the world you live in now. And a lot of HSC questions, and a lot of other questions for that matter, will go on to basically how you interpret the text from your standpoint and how you view it based on your world experience, and may ask you to talk about that. So that's the sort of thing that you will talk about, is the way that you see things being different from, say, how someone else sees them. Alright, through this it is possible to identify, discuss, or evaluate basically how a text changes in the meaning over that time period. So as I mentioned before with that example, the meaning of car is something that has changed quite significantly as the technology has developed, but it's not necessarily a technological thing. It can be socially. For instance, if you're looking at something like attitudes towards women have changed a lot, and for the better in the last 100 years or so, from women simply being able to vote to women being able to have the same rights and basically the same sorts of legal protections as men do. So before 100 years ago, that wasn't quite the case, whereas now we do have that. So it's something that society has changed in its morals and ethics. So meaning of a text, therefore, when talking about women in the early 1900s compared to now, has changed over that time period.